If you're an average player, you want to be left alone, all right, because you want to be able to slide by. If you're a good player, you want to be coached. If you're a great player, you want the coach to tell you the truth every day. Did I hustle on that play? Did I make the right read? Did I play the guy with the right leverage? You want to know every play, because you know why? They want to be perfect. Everybody here makes a choice to do one of those three things.
Welcome to the GOAT Consulting Podcast, a podcast dedicated to people striving to be a GOAT, the greatest of all time, serving it up in a way that you can get it in all stages of life.
Hey, I'm Colby Jubenville, and welcome to another episode of the GOAT Consulting Podcast right here in studio and VC Productions in Nashville, Tennessee. We got a great show for you today. It's part two with Faith Dickey. She is the Professional Highliner, founder of Elevate Outdoors. You got to check out elevateoutdoorsguiding.com, where teaching and instruction has now become your passion, and we're excited to continue that conversation with you today. We had a great conversation in part one of this show. John, you always find the most incredible guests. She's had a short film done about her. She had a car wreck that led to an awakening. She's talked about humanness, and that is such a critical piece to being a GOAT. And so we're going to continue our conversation today, and I'm going to, as Spencer would say, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take that and keep moving the ball down the field.
And there's not much more human than eating at an all-you-can-eat buffet, which Faith has recently done for the first time in her
that's
very few 34 years.
I mean,
so
I was going to Godfather's Pizza buffets at probably age 6 or 7. I mean, that's a staple.
All the conversations
South Alabama.
All the conversations in your life are different after you've eaten at all-you-can-eat buffet. So
Olive Garden. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Faith, it's so good to have you.
Is there anything more American than an all-you-can-eat buffet? That's the question.
Rolling chairs, carpet. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yes. We're going to continue to unpack some super cool things that that I've learned from you, that I've read, I've heard you share about. By the way, I've known of you for some time, but one of the things that prompted me to reach out to you more recently was watching the first episode of Limitless. And Chris Hemsworth is narrating your story, which I haven't had that experience yet with Chris. He keeps telling me he's going to narrate my story at some point, but it just hasn't happened. But for you, what was that like? And by the way, Limitless, I think it's a 6-part series on National Geographic, Disney Plus. It's an incredible series. And Chris Hemsworth is like a giant fan of yours and showcases you on the show to help him with that particular episode. What was that like?
Well, this is going to sound a little bit flippant, but I actually had no idea he was going to narrate my part of the story.
Something that a GOAT would say.
It does sound a touch flippant, yes. but I like it.
The idea for that episode changed a lot over time, because initially they reached out to me before the pandemic, and so the original concept was that I was going to actually go to Australia and teach Chris Hemsworth how to highline, which I was super excited about.
Well, yeah.
And then the pandemic happened and things got delayed, and then the production company was based in the UK and they couldn't travel to the States, so I ended up getting them to hire a friend of mine as the director, and we ended up doing a really small crew and filming everything on location in Moab, Utah. And so it really just kind of felt like I was out doing my thing. It didn't really feel like I was filming for this massive scale production, because I knew everyone on set. They were all friends of mine. My partner was a rigger with me. And so I was literally it was hard work. I was, we filmed for 6 days. But I was just doing what I knew how to do.
So the highlining in there, obviously the interviews in there were from this crew, but the highlining was also done just for Limitless?
Yep.
Wow.
Cool.
Cool.
the whole thing, the climbing, the highlining. We got it all done. It's really cool because when you hire a group of people who are all climbers and outdoors people who also know how to use sound equipment and cameras, you need a third of as many crew members. There was no makeup on site. There was no craft tent. We just did it all ourselves. I know, the craft tent was a missing element.
No craft tent.
No blue M&Ms.
Get VC Productions down there. There'll be a damn craft tent. I can assure you that. And makeup.
I don't know.
I mean, look at me, for God's sakes.
Everyone just knew their way around ropes, so it was easy.
Wow.
And
yeah,
so
I'm
we
still
just
upset about the craft tent.
it was hard work, but we got it done. And then, I kind of just knew it was going to turn out good because my friend had directed it. But I had no idea how it was going to be worked into the story.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have a lot of backstory information on the whole series.
Yeah.
And so then when Chris Hemsworth was too busy, aka too scared for me to go teach
That's
him how to
right.
highline.
Thank you for saying that. I was going to. I think you should change the whole title to Under the Craft
Chris,
Tent
if
with
you're
Chris
listening,
Hemsworth.
that
I
is
mean,
a
this is
challenge.
absolutely crazy.
He does listen.
It goes,
He
boys,
better
it
listen
goes.
to her.
He does listen to this podcast, and he's gonna feel a little
Chris,
shame.
shame on you. Get under the craft tent. This is crazy.
And
Well, I'm hoping for a sequel. So
We'll be there.
we're gonna push for that. One of the things you just brought it up, but one of the things you talk about often, you did it there, and that particular episode was about getting more comfortable with stress. And that's one of the things I talked about you, and within that and other places, you talk about fear so clearly. And one of the things I've heard you say is in the moment that you're engaging with fear or of death, it becomes really clear what's important in life. And you go on to talk about how fear is flexible, and you talk about primal fear versus manufactured fear, all these different areas that you've shared. I would love to hear you unpack some of that. And I'm going to share just a very quick story that I've shared on here before, but I think about it every time I think of you. And when you talk about fear, is there's this moment in the movie Frozen, and my daughter, who's 5, and I have watched it 3,000 times, and she was 3 at the time when we're watching. There's a scene where 2 of the characters like jump over this ravine, and the carriage like barely makes it, and she's sitting on my lap 2 years ago at 3, and I said, "Gee, would you want to do that?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Would you be scared?" And she said, "Yes," and brave. And she's 3, and I'm 40 at the time. Today,
you couldn't have that answer.
And I'm like, it's taken me 40 years to realize that those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Like, in fact, you don't have bravery or courage without fear. I would probably put it that way, despite those no fear shirts that I always wore growing up that were so terribly ugly. And
What would Brene Brown say about that whole line of clothing?
I was so proud of them, by the way. You're too young probably to remember the no fear shirts.
No, they were still around.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Talk to us about fear, please, and how you engage with it, how you live with it.
Well, first of all, you should definitely interview your daughter on your podcast. She sounds like she have a
idea.
ton of great quotes.
She's awesome.
Maybe you should just do a whole kids series. But
Great
fear.
idea.
So
Ooh, goats are everywhere.
I would love to ask your daughter what her goat is and see what her answer would be.
Oh, we know the answer.
That's episode 3 with Faith Dickey.
It's Colby, for God's sakes.
Anyway, okay, so fear. I think every person has an idea what fear is, right? We all kind of, we're riding a bike, we almost crash as a kid and we get scared, okay? There's a sound of the night, you get scared, but you don't really examine what fear is until you're much older. And highlining introduced me to a type of fear I had never encountered before, and that was primal fear, this kind of hardwired fear that all humans have. Humans haven't been around on this planet for very long. And so we're still kind of navigating a world based on this hardwiring we have to run from bears. It's, it doesn't always
Well, that is
line up.
interesting. I have never thought of that.
Really?
But it's true.
It is true. I mean, we're designed to survive.
It's
right?
hardwired in
And
our
so-
DNA.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I think a lot of times our brains respond to situations as if we're in a fight or flight moment, even though we don't need to respond that way. But that's just the automatic go-to for our mind. And so getting on a highline, you're on this 1-inch wide wobbly line stretched across a gap, hundreds to thousands of feet in the air. If anything is going to trigger that part of your fight or flight response, it's that activity. So all of a sudden, it's like, I want to do this activity. I've created this challenge. I want to be there, but my brain is telling me to get the hell away from it.
Can I pause? Don't forget what you're going to say. But as you're describing that, it takes me back to this moment in the short film that was released very early in the film where you are on the line, and it's so beautifully done, but you're on the line and and your voice starts playing in the background, all those things that you're just talking about, like it's cold, you're shaky, you didn't train enough, all
Yep.
those voices that go on in our
Gonna
head,
fall.
like
Yep.
that feed that fear, right?
Yep.
Like that's what you're describing.
Exactly. And that primal fear is really powerful, but it is possible to overcome it. And one method is, of course, desensitization. Every time you challenge yourself and push your limits, you get more used to that space. And eventually your brain learns, like, okay, I'm not going to die when I do this. And that totally happened to me with highlining. I highlined enough that every time I went out there, I felt less and less afraid of death. Because, I was wearing a harness and a leash. I was attached to the line. I was totally safe. But my brain doesn't recognize that. My brain is just like, oh my God, you're standing in the void. Like, this is where you fall and die.
Yes.
And
That's
so
what
that
the rest of us are thinking.
Yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
and
But you
sometimes
don't
it's
think
just-
that now.
No, I don't. No, it's actually, I would say, very difficult for my brain to go to that space on a high line. I can still feel that way approaching a cliff.
So what I heard you
So-
say is that you don't have a flight or fight response to that stress that is in that moment.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so this is your book right here. Okay. So if you don't have a fight or flight response, then what is you've trained your brain
Yes.
to handle that stress.
Yes, I would say that's correct.
That's why she was highlighted on this Limitless show. And it's a fascinating piece. And I want you to keep going, but weave in here because you talk about risk a lot. And I feel like it's a very close conversation here, whether we're talking about fear, risk, they could be the same thing, but maybe weave that in because you say some really cool stuff about risk. In fact, I think one of the first times I reached out to you, I had created a quote from you on a quote board or whatever you would call that, right? But it was your words where you say, to avoid all risk, we never learn what we're capable of. Mm-hmm. And you could really say to avoid, you could put fears in there just as easily, but weave risk into the conversation too.
Well, so the thing with risk and highlining, for example, is that even if you do it all correctly and you're totally safe because you're harnessed in and you have a tether, so you're not going to die, the consequence is still very high if something does go wrong. So I would still say it's a much riskier activity than, say, just taking a stroll through your neighborhood. You know, like you are very high off the ground. And so it is pretty safe if you do it correctly, but there is risk involved. And I think the other interesting point is that our mind is going to perceive risk the same way, even if it's a real risk or not. If our brain acknowledges a risk, then we're going to respond to that feeling, right? So I think walking up to a cliff is a good example. You can walk very easily. Okay, you're walking on solid ground. There's no problem, right? You don't feel scared. You don't feel like anything's going to go wrong. You do that exact same thing 10 feet towards a cliff edge, and you feel suddenly like, oh my God, I might trip and just roll off this edge and die. Suddenly you lose confidence in your body's function and mobility. It's such a weird response that doing the exact same activity on solid ground, not high off the ground, is easy, but you just replace the same thing near a cliff edge and you respond totally differently.
Is it the repetition that starts to make that go away?
I think so. I think repetition and also really being curious about it, because there are people who progress very slowly at the sport of highlining, and perhaps for them the intensity is so strong that it just takes much longer to desensitize their mind. I noticed that as I was highlining a ton those first few years I got into the sport, and so eventually I was able to kind of approach a highline and just see it as a physical challenge. Like I wasn't scared at all. But that brings me to another type of fear I want to talk about, because there's this primal fear that, we're all hardwired with, or most of us. But there's these other fears that become present almost when that primal fear kind of fades away. And those are the what if fears. That's what I like to call them,
Would you call those the manufactured fears?
They're kind of, they're manufactured, they're invented, they're they're very ego centered. I would say that like hardwired fear is more of a instinct, whereas these other types of fear that kind of circulate in our minds every day, those are coming from the ego. And those fears may sound like, I'm not good enough, I'm too tired, I haven't trained enough for this, I'm gonna fall, I'm really shaky, everyone's looking at me, they know I suck, I'm an imposter. There's so many voices that can arise.
Yeah.
And I feel like by overcoming my primal fears, I was able to see those other kind of ego-based thoughts and fears more clearly. Like they became the louder voices.
Faith, this is really, really powerful. I wrote down repetition and curiosity desensitizes fear. And you didn't say repetition. I think you'd probably double down on curiosity, which I'm all in on. And that's
repetition too. You can't just do something once and be curious about it and have it totally evaporate, right?
I remember hearing an interview with Alex Honnold post El Cap, free soloing that, what he's the GOAT for, I think. And outside of Lynn Hill, because she did it first. She set a path for him. We'll put it that way. But I remember somebody asking him about, how do you think about these people that ice climb? And he said, oh, it's too risky. And the whole crowd laughs. They're like, what? And he goes, no, first of all, things can happen there that can't happen here. And I have done this so many times that it's not risky for me anymore. I remember asking you about some version of this in a prior conversation, and you said something very similar to him when he was asked about ice skating. You were like, well, I always thought if I'm on a highline and I trip and fall, I can always grab the rope. That just makes causes me to have an allergic reaction. But I think it's the same one he, kind of how he would describe ice climbing, right? Like, just because you don't have experience there, and yet it changes your relationship with fear.
Absolutely. And I would say to be in control of something is the first step of being less afraid of it. When you feel out of control, you're much more likely to be scared. And so a person like Alex Honnold, or in my case, highlining all the time, I felt very in control. So I was able to just not be afraid of that piece of the puzzle. There was no reason to be scared if I was in control.
Wow.
But at the same time, there's a huge element of accepting risk. When I walked Highlines free solo with no safety harness, I knew I was taking a risk, even though I felt totally capable and confident in my skills to get across that line safely. I had to accept that if something went wrong, I might die.
So
I don't think you can do the thing without accepting the risk.
So I think I might have curiosity around the control versus what you just said, because there's almost like this acceptance of no control at all. Maybe that's the ultimate form of control, right? Realizing and becoming aware, I really don't have control at all, and
I'm going to perform my way through this.
And I'm okay with that. What do you think about that?
I disagree, because I think
I don't know what I believe, so please help me. Tell me what you disagree with. I don't even know.
How can you disagree with that when you say yourself, I am totally relying on my own capabilities that I know will move me to where I want to move, despite the environment, despite the challenges that are in front of me.
Well, I would say that's the part I have control over.
Uh-huh.
I don't have control over a hawk flying into my face while I'm out there.
Mm.
But I do have control over my experience, my skills, my knowledge. Yeah. So I don't think it's wise to just go take a risk where death is a possible outcome without those skills.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like you do every day.
Say life's out of control. Yeah. Go for it. It's more like, do what it takes to be as controlled as you can be. And obviously you can't control everything.
Yeah. One of those skills that you have that I want to talk about before we move on to our Think and Do Not Say segment, one of those skills that you have is you call it micro adjustments. And you talk about, as I watch your videos and you can see it. You can see it in your fingertips. You can see it in your wrists and your arms. like it seems like, now that I'm aware of it after you said it, you're constantly making these micro adjustments to be able to perform at your very best. Is that true? And maybe talk a little bit about those, please.
Yeah, from a physical standpoint, walking on a high line, even though it is such a mental activity, there is a technique that's super important. And highliners use their arms for balance. We don't use a pole. But sometimes regaining equilibrium can be as simple as a flick of the wrist or just moving a single finger. It's so wild how you can like fine tune your equilibrium on a slack line. I think in the beginning it's normal to shake a lot more, and some people always shake, like they just are shaky walkers and that's their style, and it doesn't matter, they're still able to succeed. For whatever reason, I've always aimed to walk as smoothly as possible,
even in high heels.
Even in high heels.
Yeah.
And so micro adjustments for me are like, how can I minimize the struggle of this physical activity down to just a flick of my wrist or a slight shift of my arms?
Yeah.
I don't want to exert a ton of energy flailing around.
Right.
I want it to be just a tiny, minute movement that brings me back to equilibrium.
And we don't know the answer to this, right? Like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? But how many of those micro adjustments was the actual reason at certain times that you didn't fall? Or maybe I should say that you stayed alive, right? Like,
I have no idea, because you'd have to also
you don't know.
You'd also have to like add into the equation all the micro adjustments in my mind that are happening, right? Because sometimes you just get distracted in your mind and you start to lose balance. It's like your body just responds immediately to thinking about something else.
It reminds me of, I don't know if you know this story, Dave Brailsford, who was the British cycling coach, who, when he took over the team, had never won, or maybe had been so long since they had won a Tour de France. And he talks about the aggregation of marginal gains. That's what it reminds me of. And it's like, it's how and he changed everything about the cycling team so that they would actually win the Tour. And all the way down from the pillows they slept on, the color of the inside of the van, their socks, all these micro adjustments that made a significant difference. And they end up winning the Tour in 2 years versus 5. And he would credit it back, all these 1% gains that we made along the way. And that's kind of what I hear as you talk about that. So,
and I just want to add that
please,
the really cool thing about slacklining and highlining is that it is such an individualistic sport. So many people experience it in their own way. I think that's part of what drew me to it, was like, I could have that space for myself, even though I got to work with a team to set up the line and go do the project. Once I was out there standing on the line, it was really about me and my experience. And it felt so good to have that kind of space to just own it and let it completely be about me. And
you didn't have your phone out taking a video. You didn't do anything. It was just what you described. Yeah.
And for some people, they might have a completely different experience on a high line than I do. For them, they might not care about micro adjustments or walking as smoothly as possible.
Yeah.
For them, it might just be about getting across however they can. I think it's really cool how this sport lends itself to, kind of like having your own story out there.
Gosh, that's really good. One of the ways that we honor our guests is we like to have this conversation, which we call the things you think and do not say, which really comes from the movie Jerry Maguire, one of the greatest movies of all time. He writes this mission statement at the beginning of the movie. It's not a memo, it's a mission statement, and it's the things we think and do not say.
The future of our business.
And I want to throw out a quote that you said also in this short film that just came out. And it might be one of the most profound things I've ever heard. And so I didn't tell you I wanted to talk about this because I want to get this raw feedback from you. But you said, in a world where everyone seems intent on finding themselves, I'm on a journey of undoing myself. And that gripped me. Like, that's the word that I keep thinking. Like, not even marked me, but like gripped me. Like, it's still, I'm holding on to that.
Excuse me.
I would love for you to talk more about what that means to you, why you said it, and how you're living that question. of undoing?
I'm actually really glad you brought that up because it is something that's really important to me. And what I meant by that is that sometimes we can chain ourselves to a certain set of ideals or a way of life. So much of it can be our own doing or just society's doing. You know, we're so conditioned to see and think and believe things. And I think undoing ourselves can be much more productive than finding ourselves, right? The idea of finding yourself is that there's some you that's permanent and finished, awaiting you to discover yourself there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a ridiculous idea that
but
you're
that's
ever
what-
going to be a finished product
That's
and
the
that you're
big
ever going
craze.
to find it.
That's the
Yeah,
craze
totally.
of the world, and you totally view it with a unique perspective, which is something we talk about all the time. And you flip it on its head, and I absolutely love it because the world is saying, you know, go find yourselves, and yet there's so much more undoing that I think has to be done before we can even go there, and we're missing
Agreed.
the most important part, I think, which is what you bring up.
And a lot of undoing myself has to do with undoing, you know, intergenerational trauma and undoing beliefs I have about myself
Yeah.
that were formed at a very early stage in my life. And that film that just came out, you know, it was made at this time when I was really at a type of rock bottom. So I had been a professional athlete for, you know, 8 or 9 years, but I'd destroyed my body in the process. My knees were wrecked. I was, you know, no longer held every world record. And unbeknownst to me, I'd been kind of fusing my identity with my achievements along the way. And it was something I didn't expect to happen to myself. I just didn't think I was vulnerable to that. However, all of a sudden I was faced with, oh, if I'm not the best and I'm not as good as I used to be, I'm worthless. Who am I? Like, no one's going to want to spend time with me if I'm not the best. It sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but at that time, that is really what I was feeling. And I think we're so prone to fusing our identities and our worth with our external achievements, which is such a precarious world to live in because we are human. Things break, people die, things fall apart, and a lot of it is out of our control. And if all of your self-worth is based on things you can do outside of yourself, you're in a really vulnerable position. And so since that movie was made,
and you're talking about intrinsic value.
Yes,
what you're getting.
intrinsic value,
Yeah.
exactly. And since that film was made, and what I really meant by undoing myself was I'm trying to undo all of these attachments so I can really recognize my value just by being a human on this planet, because I truly believe we all are valuable just for being here.
Wow.
With nothing else. And that doesn't mean you don't strive to be your best, and it doesn't mean you don't have goals. But if you can carry around that intact sense of worth, you're going to be much stronger and better equipped for life's challenges.
I think that could be the whole episode, just that part right there.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
So
coming to my
good.
TED Talk.
Yes. It's so good.
You have like
Faith.
17 TED Talks
My
here.
gosh. Okay. The final layer of the Faith Dickey onion that we're going to unpeel here is we want to hear your top 5 songs. And maybe not, I don't want to like put you in a box with that, right? So if it's your Spotify top 5 on repeat, like what do you play? What does Faith Dickey listen to? Like if there was only 5 songs, what would that be?
I like that there's a little more freedom in this. Last time it was like the top Spotify songs and you hadn't heard of a single one.
Okay.
We've been
Dang
working on
it.
John since then.
Yeah.
Giving
You've
it
really
a little more flexibility with his questions.
You've helped me evolve.
Yes.
My
So thank
fear-
you for that.
My fear is more flexible than ever.
Please send the bill.
All right, so I'm going to look at this list and pick some that I would say.
Yes.
Here's one that everyone will know
Yeah.
that I always return to. You know, I listen to it for a while, then I forget about it for a while, and then I always come back to it because it's just such a damn good song. And it's Jolene by Dolly Parton.
Oh, it's so
I
good.
thought you were going to say Tito Fuentes. But Jolene it is.
Jolene.
You know she lives 1 mile from me.
Really?
Yep.
I've heard she's very nice.
She's so good. She's so great. Next time you're here, we'll go by and we'll have some tea.
I
We'll
got
have
to
some
get her on
tea.
a Highline.
Yes.
Yes.
Jolene. Well said.
Kickoff March. Dolly Parton. Moab, Utah.
She sits
One
next
night only.
in my playlist.
One
her-
night only.
Dolly and Tupac are next to each other. I'm sure she would
That's-
absolutely
Let's get Tupac there too.
She would adore that, I think.
I mean, if he was still here and they could have done like
oh
a
my
duo,
gosh, you know that they would both do it.
I got a great
would have been
production company. They would kill it.
a banger.
All right.
Love
it.
Next song I've got. There's so many I could choose from. These are all so good. This is one you probably do. You know the Bacau Rhythm and Steel Band?
I'm gonna look it up now.
They are like an acoustic.
I knew them early in their earlier years, but not now.
They're an acoustic like brass band, but
Yeah.
they do covers of like rap and hip hop songs.
What's
and
the
it's
song that?
cool.
What's the song that's?
Pimp? Pimp.
Got it.
I actually would like that. That's acoustic
It's-
rap is what I'm into. I'm serious. There's a band.
Colby, don't.
There's a
surprise me
band
all.
down in PCB that plays acoustic rap that is absolutely. I tell people they play acoustic 90s rap. I sent you the video.
She's not redneck and know what PCB means.
I'm sorry, Panama
I
City
don't.
Beach.
But I do like.
It's very
acoustic rap.
distasteful.
It's great.
Redneck.
I mean, I knew what it was. All right, 3
All
to go.
right, next one. Have you heard of Sylvan Esso?
I'm
No.
not.
Sylvan Esso, and Coffee is the song.
Okay.
Mm,
All right.
coffee.
Coming in at number 4.
Coming in at number 4. Okay, I gave you this one last time, but I am really all
Bring
about
it.
it right now. And it's Cradles by Suburban.
I do remember that.
Okay.
I do remember that.
Yep. You didn't know that one either.
Mm-mm.
And then next one I'll give you is Ancient Astronauts is the band.
Colby's
And
favorite.
Break
is
My Heart in
doubt.
Two is the
They-
song.
They played the Capizigals in the early 90s.
Break My Heart in Two. Okay.
I think that's a good like spread of songs that I like.
What
So
we've
good.
come to is this conclusion that like John came up with this idea of peeling the onion back, but right in the center of the onion is music.
I think so.
Oh, I love music. I have
Oh yeah.
I
It's-
also play a little bit of music, so
it's the universal
I've been-
emotional touch point.
Yep.
There's no doubt.
Well,
and I
it's-
listen to music while I highline too. So.
I mean, we accomplished so much today. We've got your first book, your relationship with fear, why micro adjustments are important.
yeah.
We've
gosh,
got
there's so much.
we've got like 7 TED Talks for you.
We got the picture of her at Meow Wolf.
We
No,
now
that was in
know
the casino and Meow Wolf.
we're going to
We
do
got
a follow up on what happened in Vegas with that whole get up that you talked about. That's a different
Nothing
episode.
too crazy.
Let's
We were
just,
in
you
bed
know
by
what?
midnight.
Let's just see if we can figure out how this doesn't record and do it again. Let's do that.
No, I've actually been recording a voice memo this entire time
Well,
as a backup.
Well,
Your voices won't be in it, but you can add them later. if
Oh,
necessary.
well, that's
so good.
hurtful. That's you know what? That's
Hey,
understandable.
what? Real quick, what earbuds do you have when you're on a highline
Listening.
and you're listening to music?
Typically just some like this, like
Oh
normal
wow,
earbuds that plug in.
Is that a hazard
so
if you
simple.
get caught on the line with
so simple.
you
They
do?
just rip out of your ears, so it's not a
Okay.
big deal.
Yeah.
I also have some Bluetooth ones that like hook around my ears,
Yeah.
and I use a little piece of cordalette to tie them to whatever shirt I'm wearing.
Ah, just-
A
you don't wanna
consideration on
lose
the Highline
those.
is dropping things, so
Right.
there's lots of like little pieces of string we use to tie everything to ourselves.
Keep
Faith,
it- keep it up.
You are fascinating, and you're super cool, and you are a fashion designer, even though you didn't go get that in school.
Rock band.
And I'm going to hold on to this quote that in a world where everyone seems intent on finding themselves, I'm on a journey of undoing myself.
She is undoing
So
herself. You know, we talked about Jack and I listening to that CD, advancing confidently in the direction of your own dream and living a life that only you can imagine. You are certainly doing that, and we appreciate you making time for us and our
So
audience today.
Can I make you guys talk a little bit about my business real fast?
Please bring it.
Thank you for doing that
Bring
for me. I'm still in host school. This is
Steve-
my second semester.
Stephen James Leadership Lab. They do these trips with Wilderness. I don't know if you're familiar with that group. That we're gonna make your destination.
Please tell us
a
about it.
stop on the way.
Yes.
Yeah, so sort of the evolution of my career as an athlete. So kind of what became of that rock bottom I hit of being like, oh man, all of my purpose and value is related to these achievements. And, I'm getting older and I'm a human and I can't just keep beating records forevermore. Was a few years of kind of being a little bit lost and not knowing what I wanted to do. And a couple years ago, I had a bit of a light bulb moment of like, duh, I live in Moab, which is a total mecca for highlining and climbing and canyoneering and rappelling. And I have all these skills and all this knowledge. And probably what I'm most passionate about is sharing it with people and helping people learn some of the lessons that took me a decade to learn in a much quicker, succinct way. And so it was like, I should start a guiding business. And so, yeah, what you've mentioned several times on the podcast is that I've started Elevate Outdoors. That's the business I'm launching this spring. And I'm really excited because I've created a system where I can get someone on a highline, even if they have no slackline experience whatsoever. And that's a system where there's a rope above them. And so their leash is tied above them, above the line they're walking on. And that prevents them from falling under the line and feeling stranded. And you have something to hold on to while you walk.
Training wheels for highliners.
Exactly. It is training wheels for highliners.
I love it.
And it still gives you the possibility to stand 400 feet off the ground in the middle of a canyon on a wobbly line and get all of the visceral experience related to that.
I'm in.
John's going.
We may need
part
to
of what
send
I want to
somebody.
do is, get people out on the line, especially market to women, get more women outdoors, and hopefully eventually work with disabled people. I think it'd be really cool. There's a lot you can do with the kind of suspension abilities of Highlines. So I just have a lot of big goals with this company, and I'm taking it one step at a time, not to be cliche.
I love that. I love
But
it.
yeah, if you ever want to come out and try a Highline, please look me up.
Well, I certainly believe in the next 6 months there'll be a highlining school right out there in Moab. Southwest, go ahead and get a hub right there in Moab, because there's going to be a lot of people getting on those planes going direct straight into Moab. We appreciate you taking the time. Love your vision, love your passion, love your drive, but most importantly, love your humanity. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you guys for having me.
You're awesome.
Absolutely. So for Faith Dickey, for John Byers, and for AJ on the board, I'm Colby Jubenville, and this is the Go Consulting Podcast.
Boom.